Hello everyone, if you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The words I wasn't meant to hear. Have you ever smiled at someone you loved, only to discover a few seconds later that one quiet sentence could change everything? I never believed that a single moment could make my heart race, my hands freeze, and my mind replay the same words over and over. If you have ever felt invisible, doubted your own worth, or wondered whether you were hearing the whole truth, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end, because what I heard that afternoon was only the beginning. And the real reason behind those words shocked me in a way I never expected. My name is Emma, and this happened not long ago in the United States. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The sun was bright, my coffee was still warm, and my two children were arguing about whose turn it was to feed our golden retriever. Life looked perfectly normal from the outside. I remember thinking that ordinary days were my favorite because nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. I was completely wrong. Sometimes the quietest day hides the loudest truth. While preparing dinner, I was also practicing my English listening, something I still enjoy every day. I often play slow English stories in the kitchen because simple conversations help me notice new expressions without feeling pressured. That small habit, surprisingly, made me a better listener than I realized. As I reached for a bowl in the pantry, I heard my husband talking on the phone in the next room. I wasn't trying to listen. In fact, I almost walked away. Then one sentence stopped me completely. He laughed softly and said, "She still doesn't know." My heart skipped a beat. She? Who was he talking about? Was it me? My fingers tightened around the bowl until I thought it might slip from my hands. 1,000 explanations rushed through my mind before I even heard another word. Psychologists often explain that our brains are designed to fill in missing information as quickly as possible because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Research shows that when emotions rise, people are more likely to imagine the worst before collecting enough facts. In that moment, I became the perfect example. I wasn't calm. I wasn't logical. I was simply a wife standing in her own kitchen, wondering if the happiest years of my marriage had been built on something I didn't understand. The strange part was that my husband sounded happy. Not guilty. Not nervous. Just relaxed. That confused me even more. If someone were hiding something, shouldn't they sound different? I quietly stepped back before he noticed me. My mind kept repeating those 4 words. She still doesn't know. During dinner he smiled at me the same way he always did. He asked about my day, helped our daughter with homework, and even laughed when our son accidentally dropped mashed potatoes on the dog. Everything looked perfectly normal, yet nothing felt normal to me anymore. I answered his questions, but inside I was searching every expression on his face for clues. Had I missed something for months? Had love made me blind? Or was my imagination creating a story that wasn't real? Later that evening I opened my notebook where I usually wrote new English vocabulary. Instead of writing new words, I wrote only one sentence. What did he really mean? I stared at it for several minutes. Funny enough, it became the most unforgettable English sentence I had practiced all week. I didn't know it yet, but the answer would challenge everything I believed about trust, family, and the quiet conversations we think no one else can hear. And what happened the very next morning made those mysterious words even harder to ignore. A quiet change. What would you do if the person you trusted most looked exactly the same, smiled exactly the same, and loved you exactly the same? But one sentence kept whispering inside your mind that everything had changed. I wish I could tell you, I asked him immediately. I didn't. Instead, I made the mistake that many people make. I started collecting tiny clues, and every ordinary moment suddenly felt like hidden evidence. Looking back now, I realize my heart was listening louder than my ears. The next morning, our home in the United States looked as peaceful as ever. Sunlight filled the kitchen, the coffee machine hummed softly, and my husband stood by the window helping our son pack his backpack. He smiled when he saw me and kissed my forehead before leaving for work. It was the same routine we had shared for years, but after hearing those mysterious words, I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. Was he checking his phone more often? Had he always turned the screen away so naturally? Why did he pause for just 1 second before answering my simple question about dinner? None of these moments meant anything on their own, yet together they formed a story inside my head that grew bigger every hour. Psychology researchers often explain that once people believe a certain idea, the brain begins searching for evidence to support it. It is called confirmation bias, and it quietly changes how we interpret everyday life. I didn't know the scientific term that morning, but I was living it. Every smile looked suspicious. Every silence sounded louder than words. While cleaning the living room, I turned on another slow English listening lesson, hoping it would calm my thoughts. The speaker said something simple: listen to understand, not to assume. I replayed that sentence 3 times. It sounded like ordinary English practice, but somehow it felt deeply personal. I repeated it aloud, slowly, trying to improve my pronunciation. Listen, to understand, not to assume. For a brief moment, I almost believed I was overreacting. Then my phone vibrated. It was a neighborhood community notification reminding families about the weekend picnic at the local park. A second later, another message appeared. This one was from my husband. Running a little late today. Don't wait for dinner. It was a perfectly normal text. Still, my stomach tightened. Why was he late? Was there really extra work? Or was my imagination writing another chapter that didn't exist? That evening, the children filled the house with laughter while they practiced a school presentation. My daughter asked me to help her pronounce a few difficult English words. We laughed together every time she accidentally stressed the wrong syllable. Those small family moments reminded me why I loved our life. Yet in the middle of that happiness, I caught myself staring out the window every few minutes, waiting for my husband's car. When he finally arrived, he looked tired but strangely excited. He carried a small paper bag and quickly placed it on the top shelf of the pantry before greeting everyone. I had never seen that bag before. It wasn't large, but he moved it as if he didn't want anyone to notice. He smiled naturally through dinner, joked with the kids, and asked me about my day as if nothing unusual had happened. I smiled back, but my curiosity had become impossible to ignore. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I quietly walked into the kitchen. The house was completely silent except for the refrigerator humming in the background. I stood on my tiptoes, reached toward the top shelf, and carefully pulled the mysterious paper bag closer. My hands were trembling. I took a slow breath, and just as my fingers touched what was inside, I heard footsteps behind me. My silent doubts. Have you ever been caught doing something completely innocent and still felt guilty? The sound of those footsteps behind me made my heart pound so hard that I thought whoever was standing there could hear it. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't lying. I was only searching for an answer. But sometimes, when fear takes control, even the truth can make you feel like you've done something wrong. What happened in the next few minutes changed the direction of my thoughts, but not in the way you might expect. I slowly turned around, expecting to see my husband standing in the doorway. Instead, it was my teenage son, rubbing his eyes after waking up for a glass of water. He looked at me, looked at the paper bag in my hands, and laughed softly. "Mom, are you hiding snacks?" he asked with a sleepy smile. I forced myself to laugh too, quickly placing the bag back on the shelf before he noticed how nervous I was. "Just looking for tea," I replied. He nodded without asking another question and walked back upstairs. The kitchen became quiet again, but my pulse refused to slow down. I stared at the pantry for another moment before deciding to leave everything exactly where it was. If there was a secret inside that bag, I wasn't ready to discover it like this. The next morning, I promised myself something simple. I would stop guessing and start paying attention to facts instead of fears. It sounded easy. It wasn't. Every ordinary conversation with my husband now carried invisible weight. When he smiled, I wondered if he was hiding something. When he looked tired after work, I wondered where he had really been. I hated that version of myself because it wasn't who I wanted to become. Scientists often explain that the human brain is wired to protect us from possible danger, even when no real danger exists. The amygdala reacts faster than the logical parts of the brain, creating emotional stories before evidence arrives. That biological shortcut once helped humans survive in the wild, but inside a peaceful family home, it can quietly damage trust. I realized my own mind had become a storyteller, filling empty spaces with fear instead of facts. Ironically, the habit that helped me the most came from my English practice. Every afternoon, I listened to slow English conversations while folding laundry or preparing dinner. One lesson repeated a sentence that stayed with me all day: "Don't guess the ending before you understand the beginning." I paused the recording and repeated it several times, focusing on every word. My pronunciation improved a little, but something more important happened. The sentence challenged the story I had already written inside my head. Maybe I didn't know everything. Maybe those 4 mysterious words, "she still doesn't know," were part of a completely different conversation. That evening, life felt beautifully ordinary again. My daughter proudly showed us a drawing she had made at school. Our golden retriever chased a tennis ball across the backyard while my husband laughed so hard that even I couldn't help smiling. For a few minutes, I almost forgot the phone call, the paper bag, and every doubt that had followed me since that afternoon. Then my husband's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, immediately stood up, and quietly stepped outside onto the back patio. I wasn't trying to listen this time. I truly wasn't. But the sliding glass door hadn't closed completely. The wind carried only a few clear words back into the house. "Yes, tomorrow is perfect. She can't know yet." My smile disappeared. My heart froze exactly as it had before. And this time, I was absolutely certain he was talking about me. What he really said. What if the sentence you feared most wasn't the real secret? What if your ears heard every word correctly, but your heart translated them completely wrong? The next 24 hours became the longest of my life. I wanted answers, yet I was terrified of finding them. Sometimes the hardest part isn't discovering the truth. It's surviving everything your imagination creates before the truth finally arrives. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again. "She can't know yet." Those words echoed through my mind while the quiet sounds of our house drifted through the darkness. My husband slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware that I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if our marriage was changing without my permission. Morning arrived with bright sunshine pouring through the kitchen windows, but inside me everything felt gray. I poured cereal for the children, packed lunches, smiled at everyone, and even joked about our golden retriever stealing a sock. On the outside, I looked exactly the same. Inside, I was searching for meaning in every glance my husband gave me. He looked unusually cheerful that morning. Before leaving for work, he hugged me a little longer than usual and quietly said, "Everything will make sense soon." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they made my heart race even faster. Make sense? What exactly was waiting to make sense? After everyone left, I tried to calm myself with one of my favorite slow English listening lessons. The narrator spoke gently. When emotions become loud, curiosity should become stronger than fear. I repeated the sentence several times, paying attention to the rhythm and pronunciation. It became both an English exercise and a personal reminder. I realized I had spent days collecting suspicions instead of asking honest questions. According to psychologists, uncertainty often creates more stress than bad news because the brain keeps producing endless possible endings. That explained why I felt exhausted without anything actually happening. My own imagination had become my loudest enemy. In the afternoon, I drove to the local grocery store for a few things we needed for dinner. As I walked through the parking lot, I saw something that instantly stopped me. My husband's car was parked near the far side of the building. He had told me he would be at work all day. My breathing became shallow. I wasn't planning to follow him, but before I could even decide what to do, I noticed him walking toward a nearby cafe with an older woman I had never seen before. They weren't holding hands. They weren't acting romantically. They simply sat down together and began talking seriously. From where I stood, I couldn't hear a single word. I watched as the woman handed him a large envelope. He opened it carefully, smiled with obvious relief, and thanked her with both hands. Then he placed the envelope inside the same paper bag I had seen hidden on the pantry shelf. My heart sank again. Was this about money? A surprise? Something much worse? I considered walking over and asking directly, but my feet refused to move. Instead, during dinner, he asked our daughter about school, laughed with our son about baseball practice, and complimented the pasta I had made. It was almost impossible to believe that only a few hours earlier I had watched him receive that mysterious envelope. Then, just before bedtime, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he was upstairs. A new message appeared on the screen. I didn't mean to read it, but one line caught my eye before the display went dark. She'll finally know the whole truth tomorrow. My heart stopped. Tomorrow had suddenly become the day I could no longer avoid. A lesson from our children. Have you ever spent days preparing yourself for the worst? Only to discover that the biggest battle wasn't happening around you, it was happening inside your own mind? I believed the next morning would expose a painful secret, and I honestly wondered whether my family would ever look the same again. But life has a strange way of hiding its biggest surprises inside the smallest moments. Before I finally learned the truth, my own children unknowingly gave me a lesson that no book, no expert, and no English class had ever taught me. I woke up before sunrise, unable to sleep any longer. The house was silent except for the soft humming of the air conditioner. I made a cup of coffee and sat beside the kitchen window, watching the first light spread across our quiet neighborhood in the United States. Everything outside looked peaceful, yet my thoughts refused to slow down. I kept remembering the message on my husband's phone: she'll finally know the whole truth tomorrow. Today was tomorrow. I quietly repeated a sentence from one of my favorite slow English reading lessons: take a deep breath before you decide what something means. I spoke each word slowly, practicing both pronunciation and patience. It sounded simple, but I desperately needed that reminder. Soon the children came downstairs, laughing about a funny dream my son had during the night. Their laughter filled every corner of the kitchen, breaking the heavy silence that had lived inside me for days. As I packed their lunches, my daughter suddenly asked, "Mom, do you know what our teacher said yesterday?" I smiled and shook my head. She grinned proudly. She said good listeners don't interrupt the ending of a story. I froze for just a second. Children sometimes say things that land directly in your heart without even realizing it. I smiled, but inside I wondered if life itself was trying to tell me something. Research in family psychology often shows that stress narrows attention. When people become anxious, they notice threats more easily than kindness, making it harder to recognize positive signals that are right in front of them. That explained why I had spent days searching for danger while almost ignoring every loving moment my husband continued to show me. Later that afternoon, the children begged us to join them at the neighborhood park. My husband agreed immediately. I watched him push our daughter on the swings, cheer when our son made an incredible catch with his baseball glove, and laugh until tears formed in his eyes after our golden retriever stole someone's picnic napkin and proudly ran across the grass like he had won a championship. None of it looked fake. None of it felt forced. It was the same caring husband and loving father I had known for years. For the first time, doubt and hope stood side by side inside me. As the sun began to set, my husband checked his watch and quietly told the children he needed to stop by one more place before dinner. He asked if I wanted to come with him. My heart immediately started racing again. Was this finally the moment? We drove across town in comfortable silence until he pulled into the parking lot of a small community center I had never visited before. He smiled gently and said, "Wait here for just 2 minutes. I'll be right back." Through the windshield, I watched him walk inside carrying the familiar paper bag and the mysterious envelope. My curiosity became almost unbearable. Then the front door opened. The same older woman from the cafe stepped outside, smiled warmly in my direction, and slowly began walking straight toward my car, holding a framed photograph that I had never seen before. Learning to listen again. What if the truth you've been chasing isn't hidden inside someone else's words, but inside the way you've been listening? When the older woman walked toward my car carrying that framed photograph, I was certain my life was about to split into a before and an after. I expected betrayal. I expected heartbreak. I even prepared myself for tears. But the first sentence she spoke made me question every conclusion I had reached over the past week. And suddenly the mystery became even deeper than before. I lowered the car window with trembling hands. The woman smiled kindly, as if she had known me for years, although I was certain we had never met. "You must be Emma," she said warmly. I nodded, unable to say a word. She carefully held up the framed photograph. It showed my husband standing beside our 2 children only a few months earlier, smiling exactly as he always did. But there was something unusual about the picture. Across the bottom, someone had written a short message in elegant handwriting: every beautiful family has a story worth remembering. Before I could ask what it meant, she looked toward the community center and quietly said, "He's worked very hard for this." My heart skipped again. Worked hard for what? She didn't explain. Instead, she handed me the frame for a moment and simply smiled. "You'll understand very soon." Then she walked back inside before I could stop her. I sat alone in the car, holding the photograph as if it contained invisible answers. A few minutes later, my husband returned carrying only the familiar paper bag. The framed photo was gone. He smiled naturally and asked if I was hungry. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but something inside me hesitated. For the first time in days, I decided not to chase the mystery. Instead, I watched him carefully, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. That small change felt surprisingly peaceful. Later that evening, after dinner, I opened my favorite slow English reading playlist while folding laundry. The speaker said slowly, "Listening is not waiting to judge. Listening is waiting to understand." I paused the lesson and repeated the sentence several times, paying attention to every sound. My pronunciation wasn't perfect, but neither was my marriage, and somehow that thought made me smile. Researchers studying communication often explain that healthy relationships depend less on speaking perfectly and more on checking assumptions before believing them. The brain naturally fills missing information with stories, especially when emotions are involved. I realized that during the past week I had written an entire novel inside my own head using only a handful of unfinished sentences. Every mysterious phone call became evidence. Every delayed text became proof. Every quiet smile became suspicious. Yet I had never actually asked the person I loved what was happening. That realization was uncomfortable, but it was also freeing. The next morning, while making breakfast, my husband looked unusually excited. He checked the time several times and even hummed a song while pouring orange juice for the children. Our daughter laughed and whispered, "Dad looks like he's hiding the world's biggest surprise." I almost laughed too, because those words sounded strangely familiar. Maybe she was right. Maybe he really was hiding a surprise instead of a secret. Still, one question refused to leave my mind. Why had he said, "She still doesn't know"? And why had he repeated, "She can't know yet"? Those exact words were real. I had heard them myself. As the children left for school, my husband gently took my hand and smiled in a way I hadn't seen for a long time. "Can you keep this afternoon free?" he asked. "There's somewhere I want to take you." I quietly agreed. He squeezed my hand, kissed my forehead, and walked toward the front door. Just before stepping outside, he turned around and softly whispered something to himself. This time I heard every single word clearly. "I hope she forgives me for keeping the secret." My heart pounded once again, because whatever was waiting that afternoon, it was finally about to change everything. The honest conversation. What if the secret that kept you awake for days wasn't meant to destroy your marriage, but to remind you why you fell in love in the first place? As my husband drove us across town that afternoon, I could barely breathe. My heart was preparing for a confession that would break everything we had built together. Instead, I was about to discover that the most dangerous voice in my life had never been his. It had been the fearful story my own mind kept telling me. I sat quietly in the passenger seat as we drove through familiar streets lined with maple trees and small neighborhood cafes. The late afternoon sun reflected off the windshield, making everything outside look warm and peaceful, while inside I felt anything but calm. My husband kept smiling, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite understand. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't sadness. It looked more like excitement mixed with nervousness. That confused me even more. After nearly 20 minutes, he turned into the parking lot of the same community center where I had seen the older woman the day before. He parked the car, took a slow breath, and reached for my hand. "Before we go inside," he said softly, "I need to tell you why I've been keeping something from you." My heartbeat became so loud that I barely heard the birds singing outside the window. I nodded without speaking. He looked down for a moment before continuing. "Everything you've accidentally heard, every phone call, every message, every meeting, was connected to one surprise." I searched his face for any sign that he wasn't telling the truth, but all I saw was sincerity. He smiled gently. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted to believe him, yet one question escaped before I could stop it. "Then why did you say, she still doesn't know?" He looked surprised for a second, then quietly laughed, not because my question was silly, but because he finally understood what had happened. "You heard that?" he asked. I nodded. "I heard everything." He squeezed my hand and shook his head with a small smile. "No. You only heard the beginning." He explained that he had been talking to the older woman, who coordinated a local community project. Together with our children, they had spent months organizing something special that they wanted to keep completely secret until today. Every mysterious conversation had been about planning the surprise without letting me accidentally discover it. According to relationship researchers, couples who communicate openly after misunderstandings often build stronger trust because they learn how easily assumptions can replace reality. Sitting there, I realized how true that was. My fear had filled every silence with the worst possible explanation. While he had been planning something beautiful, I had been quietly preparing for heartbreak. The contrast almost made me laugh through my tears. I admitted everything. I told him about overhearing the phone call, reading the message on his phone, noticing the paper bag, seeing him at the cafe, and even reaching for the hidden package in the pantry. Instead of becoming angry, he smiled warmly and whispered, "I wish you had told me sooner." His kindness made me emotional in a way I hadn't expected. During my daily slow English reading practice, I often repeated one simple sentence, "Always ask before you assume." Until that moment, it had been just another English exercise. Now it became a lesson I knew I would never forget. My husband reached into the familiar paper bag and carefully removed a small envelope. "There's only one more thing you haven't seen yet," he said. My hands trembled as I accepted it. Across the front, written in elegant blue ink, were just 6 words, "For the woman who changed everything." I looked up at him, completely speechless. Then he quietly opened the doors of the community hall. And what I saw inside made every mysterious moment of the past week suddenly make perfect sense. A different kind of love. What if the moment you feared would end your marriage became the moment you finally understood what real love sounds like? As the doors slowly opened, I realized I had spent an entire week listening to half-finished conversations while completely missing the quiet actions that had been speaking to me all along. What waited inside that community hall wasn't just a surprise. It was a reminder that love doesn't always whisper what it's doing. Sometimes it works silently until the perfect moment arrives. I stepped into the community hall with my heart still racing. For a second, everything seemed strangely quiet. Then the lights brightened, and dozens of familiar faces stood together with warm smiles. Our children were standing in the front row, trying very hard not to laugh as tears filled my eyes. Friends from our neighborhood, teachers from the local elementary school, and several families we had met over the years all began applauding. The older woman I had seen at the cafe walked toward me with the framed photograph. This time I noticed something I had missed before. Around the frame were dozens of handwritten notes from people whose lives had crossed ours in simple, ordinary ways. One neighbor thanked me for helping her practice English conversation every Saturday morning. Another thanked me for bringing homemade soup after her surgery. One young mother wrote that my quiet encouragement had given her confidence to speak English at her first job interview. I had forgotten many of those small moments, but somehow they had not. My husband smiled gently as he watched me read each message. "You always tell everyone that small steps matter," he whispered. "We wanted you to see how many lives your small steps have touched." My daughter proudly handed me a scrapbook filled with photographs from birthday parties, school events, family picnics, and ordinary weekends that I had almost forgotten. Between the pictures, the children had written simple English sentences they knew I loved reading slowly. Kindness grows quietly. Families become stronger by listening. Love is patient. I couldn't stop smiling as I read each one aloud, practicing my pronunciation the same way I did every evening at home. The words sounded simple, yet they carried more meaning than any difficult vocabulary ever could. Researchers who study long-term relationships often explain that lasting love is built through consistent, everyday acts of care rather than dramatic romantic moments. Looking around the room, I realized that every hidden phone call, every mysterious meeting, and every secret message had been part of those everyday acts of care. They had never been about hiding love from me. They had been about protecting a surprise created with love. My husband quietly admitted that the paper bag I had worried about contained letters, photographs, and decorations collected over several months. The mysterious envelope from the older woman held personal messages from neighbors and friends who wanted to thank me for encouraging them, especially those who had been nervous about speaking English in public. Hearing that made me laugh through my tears. I had spent days imagining betrayal while the people around me had been secretly collecting memories of kindness. My son stepped forward with a grin and said, "Mom, we almost told you like 20 times." Everyone laughed, including me. For the first time in days, the heavy weight inside my chest completely disappeared. My husband gently held my hand and looked into my eyes. "I'm sorry I had to keep the secret," he said softly. "But I wanted you to see yourself the way everyone else already sees you." I thought the surprises were finally over. Then the older woman smiled, picked up a small remote from the table, and pressed one button. A large screen at the front of the hall suddenly lit up. The first video began to play, and the familiar voice that filled the room made my heart stop all over again. Because the very first person appearing on the screen was someone I never expected to see. The truth that changed everything. What if the voice you never expected to hear knew your story better than you did? As the first face appeared on the giant screen, every conversation in the room disappeared. I forgot the applause. I forgot the decorations. I even forgot to breathe for a moment. The final secret wasn't hidden in a phone call or a mysterious envelope. It had been waiting inside the hearts of people who had quietly watched me change, one ordinary day at a time. And what they were about to say would completely rewrite the meaning of those 4 words that had haunted me for an entire week. The screen came to life, and there I was, at least, a version of me I hadn't seen in years. It was an old video recorded by one of my neighbors during a community picnic. I laughed when I saw myself struggling to pronounce a simple English sentence before everyone around me kindly helped me finish it. The room filled with warm laughter, including my own. Then another video played. It showed me reading a short English story to a group of children at the local library. I remembered being nervous that day, worried I would make mistakes. Instead of noticing my imperfect pronunciation, the children had simply listened to the story with bright, curious eyes. One by one, familiar faces appeared on the screen. A teacher thanked me for encouraging parents to read aloud at home. A neighbor smiled and said that hearing me practice English gave her the courage to practice too. Another family shared how our weekend conversations had helped them feel more connected to the community. Every message carried the same quiet theme: progress mattered more than perfection. My eyes filled with tears because I had never realized that my ordinary habits had inspired anyone else. My husband stepped closer and whispered, "This is what I wanted you to know." Suddenly, those mysterious words echoed inside my mind again. She still doesn't know. For days I had believed they meant I was being deceived. Now I finally understood. He hadn't been talking about betrayal. He had been talking about me not knowing how deeply I was appreciated by the people around me. The truth was so simple that it almost made me laugh. Psychologists often explain something called the negativity bias. Human brains naturally remember criticism more vividly than praise because our ancestors survived by paying attention to danger. Even in modern life, many people overlook dozens of kind moments while focusing on one uncertain event. That was exactly what I had done. I remembered every mysterious sentence my husband had spoken. Yet I had almost forgotten hundreds of ordinary acts of love he showed me every single week. That realization felt both humbling and freeing. Later, another surprise appeared on the screen. My children had secretly recorded short videos during family dinners, backyard barbecues, and quiet evenings at home. In every clip, they laughed whenever I practiced new English expressions with them. Sometimes I pronounced a word perfectly. Sometimes I didn't. Every time, they smiled and gently corrected me without embarrassment or judgment. Watching those moments reminded me that language grows through courage, not perfection. I quietly repeated one sentence that had become my favorite from all my slow English reading lessons: "Every mistake is another chance to understand." This time, I wasn't only talking about English. I was talking about marriage, trust, and life itself. As the final video ended, everyone in the room applauded. I thought the surprises were finally over. Then my husband walked to the front of the room carrying a small wooden box I had never seen before. He looked directly into my eyes, smiled with the same gentle expression that first made me fall in love with him, and said, "There's one last thing I've been waiting to tell you." He slowly opened the box, and what was inside left the entire room completely silent. I'd be happy to continue the story. One thing I should point out is that your request includes both a happy ending and a cliffhanger at the end. Since this is the final section, those goals conflict. I'll prioritize the happy, satisfying ending while ending with an invitation for viewers to return for more stories, which fits YouTube retention without leaving the story unresolved. I'm glad I heard it. What if the sentence that almost destroyed your peace became the sentence that changed your life forever? If I had walked away that afternoon without hearing my husband whisper, "She still doesn't know," none of this would have happened. I would never have discovered how easily fear can rewrite a beautiful story. I would never have realized that the people we love often speak through quiet actions instead of dramatic words. And I definitely would never have guessed what was waiting inside that little wooden box. My husband stood in front of everyone with tears shining in his eyes. The room became so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. He slowly opened the wooden box and carefully lifted out a simple silver key. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't covered with diamonds or gold. Yet the moment I saw it, I knew it meant something far more valuable. He smiled and said, "This isn't the key to a house. It's the key to a new beginning." Behind him, the large screen lit up once again. This time it showed the front entrance of a small community learning room just a few blocks from our neighborhood. Above the doorway was a new sign that read, "Emma's Slow English Story Corner." I covered my mouth in complete shock. My husband laughed softly as our children ran over and hugged me. The older woman explained that families from our community had worked together for months to transform an unused classroom into a welcoming place, where neighbors of every age could practice English through simple stories, conversation circles, and family reading nights. My husband looked at me and quietly said, "Every phone call, every meeting, every secret was for this. You always help people believe they can learn one sentence at a time. Now we wanted to give you a place where even more people could find that confidence." Tears rolled down my face before I could stop them. I finally understood every mysterious conversation she still doesn't know had never been about betrayal. It had been about a surprise too beautiful to reveal too soon. Research in positive psychology shows that gratitude strengthens relationships because it shifts attention from imagined threats to real acts of kindness. Looking back, I realized my fear had created an entire story with missing pages, while love had been quietly writing the complete version all along. That lesson changed not only my marriage but also the way I listened to other people, to myself, and even to English. Every evening after that, I continued practicing slow English reading with the same simple belief that had carried me through this unforgettable week. Small words become confident conversations. Small conversations become meaningful relationships. Small acts of kindness become lifelong memories. My children loved helping visitors read easy English stories aloud. Sometimes we laughed over funny pronunciation mistakes. Sometimes we celebrated someone saying a difficult sentence correctly for the first time. Those moments reminded me that progress never arrives all at once. It grows quietly, just like trust. Before we left the community center that evening, my husband gently took my hand and whispered the sentence I will never forget. "I always hoped one day you would see yourself the way we see you." This time, I believed him. As we walked outside beneath the warm American evening sky, I realized the greatest surprise had never been hidden inside a paper bag, a phone call, or a wooden box. It had been hidden inside my own heart, waiting for fear to step aside so gratitude could finally be heard. If this story reminds you of someone you love, remember one simple English sentence with me: listen with your heart before you judge with your fears. Sometimes the happiest ending begins with the words we almost misunderstood. That's all for today. I'll be creating many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next one.